Our next module in this course on contemporary issues and trends in education is privatization of education. In this module, we will be looking at the need for privatization in education, the various ways in which privatization can happen, and why. Basically, it is really looking at the reason why is privatization at all necessary in education. So let us begin by looking at the definition of privatization. How do we define what privatization is? It is the transfer of activities, assets, and responsibilities from government or public institutions and organizations to private individuals and agencies. So when the government is not able to handle the pressure or the numbers or do not have the equivalent facilities, then what happens is somebody from the private sector needs to step in. And when anyone or any group or organization steps in from the private sector, it becomes privatization. So looking at the two pieces, government or public and private, these are very different because the means, the responsibilities, the purposes then begin to change. Because once a private institute or a private group or even a single individual steps in to bring about a certain change or to fill a gap, that individual, that group, that institution wants then also their requirements to be fulfilled. So it is not as simple as simply handing over the charge or the responsibility or the assets from government to the private, but it's really giving it completely up. It's giving over to the other party or the other group the total responsibility of doing what the government should have done in the long run. Privatization is also thought of as a liberalization, where agents are freed from government regulations. When anything works under the government, there will be regulations. In other words, there will be certain commitments, and those commitments have to be met. When the government gives up and a private body or institution takes over, then those regulations do not necessarily apply. They could, some of them could, but they don't really have to. So it is seen as becoming liberal. You can now do what you think is the right thing to do, and you do not need really to follow all the government regulations. Or it can also be seen as a marketization where new markets are created as alternatives to government services or state allocation systems. This is a good example of our O and A levels. Those are not our programs, they are external programs, but when the private sector felt that the matric and the intermediate was not good enough, they opted to try out the O and A levels. It caught on, there was a market, and so more private institutions picked those areas to follow rather than continue with the matric and the intermediate. So in terms of privatization, there is liberalization and there is marketization. Both things work because in the private sector, whoever steps in is definitely involved in some profit making also. No one is doing anything for free. And so marketization and liberalization then become two key factors that need to be considered. The trend towards privatization is strong. It is taking place in many countries and within many sectors of the economy. The education sector, because it is a large expenditure item in government budgets, often faces pressure to privatize. Privatization does not necessarily only belong to education. Health facilities, hospitals can be privatized. Other economic ventures can also be privatized. The education sector faces a strong challenge because there is pressure to bring about education for all these children, And when the government does not have the feasibilities, the facilities, the infrastructure to do that, the private sector will need to step in.